right, welcome back to Grimerica Outlawed. We have MD Selig with us. He's a decorated combat veteran, former Marine jet attack pilot, producer, screenwriter, and director. His latest work, Hush, exposing the unsettling truths of alien manipulation and deep state deceit. Kind of like sci-fi based on fact, I would say. Welcome to the show, MD.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
It's one of my favorite topics. I had a book, like just what you're doing with the sci-fi and using like the fact. I had a book series. I read it in the 90s called Inception, Genesis, and there was another one by Harbinson, W.A. Harbinson, I think was his pen name.
Okay.
And it was really, it was a mind-blowing series, but it was based on like the Nazi mythology about stealing the saucer, like the saucers ending up in Antarctica and somewhere else, and like
so based on fact.
Yeah, it was,
nice.
And it was in the 90s where I was into UFOs, and I was like this cool. Series, and I reached out to the guy a couple times in the last few years, like he doesn't want to talk about those books at all, but it was,
there may be something behind that.
Yeah, exactly. So I was, and all this stuff is coming up, but we've been talking about other sci-fi stuff that we'll get into later on. But I mean, I guess just tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the deep state. And all that
you got it. So I came out of college with a history degree at the University of Arkansas. And for all your Canadian fans, that is a state a little bit to the east of Texas. Everybody knows what Texas is. Yeah. But so I came out of University of Arkansas with a history degree, and then I went immediately into flight training for the Marines. So what that means is basically I go through Navy flight training. So U.S. Marine pilots go through Navy flight training. So kind of the Top Gun stuff. I went to Pensacola, Florida, and went through all the primary stuff. Then I got selected for jets and went to a place called Beeville, Texas, which is now a state prison. And I think they got rid of the base. And then eventually went to what's called a gun squadron, where I flew A6 Intruders. It's a 2-seat attack jet where there's a bombardier navigator next to me. Those jets have been mothballed. They're now 2-seat F-18s, but during the Persian Gulf conflict, I flew combat missions, and I was the intelligence officer for my squadron, and that will play into our conversation a little bit later because it'll talk about what we see coming in on top secret and what's actually disseminated to the public is a little bit different, sometimes a lot different. And after I got out of the military, I flew for 8 years, which is one tour for a pilot because they spend so much money on you. You don't just get 3 years. You have to do 8 years generally in any of the armed services if you get accepted to be a pilot. And I loved the flying, but I knew I was going to go into film and music. I moved to LA, did screenwriting, and began producing shows. I have had shows on Netflix, Showtime, and currently there's a show called The Gunrunner Billy Kane. It's a sci-fi pilot on Amazon Prime. And then just over time, people have said, hey, why don't you write a novel? Because your screenplays are so, I tend to be cinematically detailed. But the last thing I'll say is all of my stuff, especially with Hush, is excessively researched. Like it took me 3 years to write Hush. So that'll give you some sense of what I do with the settings. They're pretty darn accurate.
What about, well, actually, I'm going to ask that question later. So what about your, I'm drawing a blank here right off the bat, but I've got too many questions in my head. So I want to start off sort of slow, but when did you get interested in like this deeper? Because I heard you on Midnight. What's it called again? Midnight.
Fade to Black, maybe.
Fade to Black, yeah.
Fade to Black.
And I was surprised at how conspiratorial your thinking was. Because I guess it's hard for me to reconcile and I'm not saying that in a bad way at all. It's just like it's more kind of in line with some of the stuff that we talk about, but you've also got these shows on these mainstream platforms. So like, how do you navigate that? Or when did you become interested in sort of the deeper aspects of the deep state and the control mechanism that we're kind of...
That's a great question. Yeah. So being an intelligence officer during Desert Storm. So when you're a pilot in the American Armed Services, you're always going to have a second job, or we call it a billet, within the squadron. you can be a maintenance officer. I was a maintenance officer, and usually it's like a sliding thing. Like every 6 months, you take a new billet, right? Because the squadron is trying to teach you all the different areas of the squadron. Maintenance officer, logistics officer. You might be the squadron intelligence officer. And so when you're not flying, as the squadron intelligence officer, I would be in kind of the top secret room where documents come in, and we're processing what's happening worldwide with the military, and especially if something comes in for our squadron selectively, right? So I'm reading top secret documents, but at the same moment, especially during Desert Storm, which began in January of 1991. I don't know how many of your listeners. Again, I'm just going to throw it out there like everybody knows all this stuff, but it began, I believe, January 11th. It went for 43 days. It was only airstrikes, and my portion of the airstrikes, my missions were all on the highway to hell that became kind of famous later, where there's a line of tanks and armored vehicles coming south, and most of my missions were attacking that. But I bring this around to, I'm reading the top secret intelligence briefs that are coming in, and in my squadron mess hall, which is just this gigantic warehouse full of pilots from all over, NATO pilots from all over. I'm sure there were some Canadian dudes there, but I did not check in with those guys, but I'm sure they were there too. And I'm watching CNN. I'm reading top secret briefs of what's really going on and about to occur. And then I'm actively involved in the missions. So then I come back each day from a mission, whether I'm bombing a base because there supposedly is maybe an ammo dump there where they've got all their, they've got a buried area where they've got all of their weapons, like the ammo for their guns and this, and that can be shells, or it can be, you don't really know. It can be gas supplies or whatever they need. So I'm either bombing those types of facilities, or I'm bombing buildings where there's a suspected meeting about to take place, or I'm bombing traffic moving towards. I was on the southern tip of Bahrain.
How up close and personal is that? Is that from, are you a mile out? Are you 2 miles out? Are you right up there when you're launching the things? How far away are you dropping the bombs from?
Oh, you have surface to air missiles going by your windshields. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So
yeah.
You're probably,
so you cross the fence. So you depart Bahrain and you're crossing into Basra and then heading north, right? And it's just sparkles below you. I mean, it's just, there's so much gunfire. They're hosing off because they can hear the sound, but they can't see you, because I'm a jet that flies at night. So the intruder is built to, the best way to describe it is, you remember Luke Skywalker when he's going into the Death Star tunnel and he gets that visual on his screen and he's flying towards that. So my Bombardier Navigator, that jet, the A6 Intruder, is an all-weather attack jet. So it's built to go in when you can't see out of the cockpit, in bad weather, in mountains, in any kind of weather. That jet is set up so that the Bombardier Navigator puts a bead on the target, so to speak, with a laser, and then paints a picture for the pilot. And I just kind of fly the Star Wars Canyon, and then I drop the ordnance when it says to drop. And then we pull off and we go back home. In the case of Iraq, all of there were no missions that were obscured by weather, but we did have all the oil wells. Remember, we blew up all those oil wells and the smoke is everywhere. So if we did lower missions, we could have obscuration by smoke. But I kind of bring it all back around. To answer your question, they're firing at the sound of our jet. We don't have our lights on, so they're hearing the right. So generally they're firing behind me, but they got better as we went along. I mean, certainly some guys got shot down. My roommate was a Harrier pilot and was shot down and was a prisoner of war. But he was my roommate in flight school, so he was flying Harriers. So we went different kind of roads. But it's kind of up close and personal when you're doing combat missions, because they're obviously not happy you're there. So everything, we could see guys on the buildings just hosing off AK-47s, anything they could. They're just firing pell-mell, but they hit stuff. So there were certainly planes that got shot down via anti-aircraft batteries that were on the ground. SAM missiles. I don't know if you remember.
Can a rifle
so much,
hurt? Can a rifle fuck up a jet? Probably not. At this point, they got to be pretty well armored. Not
I would
armored.
say no. I would say a rifle bullet. I mean, it will definitely, if it hits the right spot on a jet, it's probably going to put a ping on it. But the windscreen kind of is like from my waist up. So if they're shooting from below, it's probably going to hit the bottom of the jet. But to kind of give you an anecdote to answer your question, the A6 is kind of like it's like the cleanup batter in baseball. It's the sledgehammer. So I'm watching. I think I told this on Fade to Black, Graham. You probably heard this little story, but I'm out on the flight line right after one of my flights, and all the emergency vehicles are out there, and I don't even know what's coming in. And I see it's an A6 coming in, right, at night. The thing lands, and they pull up, and I realize, oh my God, a SAM missile. So think of a telephone pole. This is the Iraqi SAM missiles in 1991. It's basically a telephone pole. It's it's like a torch lit on fire, and it shoots up. They weren't really guided at that time because we had taken out all their radar sites, but they were hosing off SAMs too, just off of sound. And it went through the wing of that A6, and the A6 still was able to land. That kind of gives you an idea, like they're really tough jets.
Was there a hole in the wing, or did it stick?
Like, a telephone pole size hole in the wing. Yeah. So the wing at its widest part, right up near the cockpit where it really expands out, is probably, I don't know, 15 feet from the front edge to the aileron flaperon on the back.
Yeah.
So there's a distance there, and I would say the SAM hole was this big. It was a pretty good size.
Across. Yeah.
And
at least, yeah.
It came in with a wing, and
it shredded. Of course, it shredded all the innards of the wing in that area. I was just amazed it didn't just take the wing off. Like, I'm surprised those guys didn't have to eject, and they brought it back. I was
they
just
don't
like,
make them like they used to. I mean, that's back in the early 60s when they made those planes.
Exactly. Yeah, they're kind of Vietnam era jets. Obviously, still capable. I mean, those things will carry 4 2,000-pound bombs, and that's a lot for a small attack jet. Wow. I mean, that's a lot of weight. 2,000-pound laser guided munitions. So they're still pretty tough. But yeah, they've been mothballed. You can still see them at like museums and stuff. They're kind of fun. There's lots of pictures online and stuff.
Wow.
So most of my experience, coming back to your question of how did I get into
the deeper stuff,
writing, this type of stuff, was what I was watching on Top Secret briefs and what was happening in the war, and what the media was putting out that we were watching on CNN each night could be really vastly different. And I realized at that point, okay, well, someone else is pulling the strings here, because this isn't accurate to the missions that we're flying tonight. Now, once in a while, it would be one of those Schwarzkopf things where he's talking on the CNN, where they always had him up there saying, here's the luckiest guy going across this bridge, and the bridge blows up after the guy gets off the bridge. He's like driving across the bridge, and right after the Iraqi truck gets off the bridge just vanishes, right? And so they like to show that stuff, but that could literally be anywhere. I mean, and so my experience was something's going on, to the extent that I just knew that the media was being kind of fed a line that they were supposed to say, and the sound bites that were supposed to be said was what we were hearing, and what was actually occurring in real time was pretty vastly different. So,
and that got you questioning the whole thing, the whole narrative, and all that.
That, and the other wild thing was, at the same time as I'm reading, so I'm reading worldwide top secret briefs. It's not just the stuff coming to our squadron, but I have access to all of it there in a safe room. And I was noticing over time, like there seems to be like a parallel world going on here of stuff that seemed to me at the time to be all I can say is it was suspect. I'm like that they seem to be talking about some kind of either alien interaction or alien contact. It just something kept hitting at me, and so that got me going as well. I just thought, because you hear stories in any kind of work environment that you're in, you just hear people talk, and I had a couple buddies that were in the squadron that had to land at Area 51 because we were doing practice missions there in the Area 51 area. And their jet had some kind of problem, a fuel problem or whatever. So they had to do an emergency landing. Now, you're not supposed to land at Groom Lake in Area 51. That's just completely off limits. But they had to because they're running out of fuel. And so when they came back from there 2 days away, I'm like on them because I'm like, hey, what'd you guys see? Because it's Area 51. And they were like, oh, it was wild. And I'm like, that's not what I want to hear.
But that must have been the early days, right after Lazar kind of made it popular in the late 80s, early 90s, or?
Yeah, he was, I think Bob Lazar was 89.
89, I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're a military pilot, all of those areas on your map, it's just red. Like you just don't go there. I mean, we fly through those areas because we're going to practice ranges and this, that, and the other. But I just remember when those two guys came back, they weren't just off the cuff like, oh, dude, we can't tell you what we saw. It's one of those things. I'm buddies with them, and I'm like, wait, no, you can't do that. And they're like, and I got the feeling like, wow, somebody dressed them down face to face, like what you saw, you didn't see. And if we hear about it, there's going to be a problem. Like it was very clear to me, like, damn, whatever those two went through, they were head down, going to their duty after that. Like I kind of got the feeling like, damn, that was some serious stuff that they were clearly confronted and told, you keep your mouth shut about that. So that also, I was like, okay, so what's going on? That's so, that's so super duper secret.
Much, they probably didn't even see much other than like the lobby. And it's just like, now, if they would have seen much, they probably don't get off the base.
Who knows? That could be correct. I have a feeling sometimes that, that could be true, that they didn't see much. But I also think I kind of get the feeling they saw something that they weren't supposed to see, because the jet's coming in unannounced, and if they have something out on the tarmac that they're working on, or even in a hangar with all the hangar doors open, and this jet is
going, and yeah.
I mean, when something goes bad in a jet and you've got an airfield nearby, I mean, you could come down within 3 minutes. They're not going to have time to put something away, is what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah, so maybe aircraft,
right? Right. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff being tested there, right? All the time, stuff in the air, stuff on the ground. We generally fly, 10 grand, 10,000 feet, like well above the runways and stuff. So we would never see anything. But if you're in an emergency, you're coming down to land. So you're kind of seeing everything that's out on the tarmac that might be tested. You're seeing any hangar doors that are open. You're seeing groups of people, if there's groups of people working on something. And certainly if there's something flying about the airfield that they're testing. I mean, it would be that type of thing where you would certainly see it.
Well, I was thinking about I don't think it's the war where the myth was created, but I don't know if you've heard about the stories about the Kandahar giant and or the museum, like that one of the reasons why they went into Iraq was to go take all the artifacts out of the museums and all that. Did you ever have any thoughts about like going into these places in the Middle East for either religious or antiquarian purposes, maybe artifacts, secret kind of stuff like that?
My thought at the time, I think what was being pushed, as far as I recall, was that he may have nuclear weapons. That was the whole thing, that we're going over the fence and we're taking these bombs and we're not bringing them back. Like supposedly he had this arsenal, right, of nuclear weapons, which turned out to be not correct. But I do remember distinctly, and I thought it was the second campaign. So I don't know if you remember, but the second campaign where it was like Fallujah and all that stuff.
Yep.
I know all of those artifacts were cleared out because I have of all things, I have nephew who's now basically retired, but he was involved, and I know a lot of those artifacts were cleared out. And my experience now with studying pretty excessively the alien question is I can see some value of why they might go in there to see maybe even what's behind walls and everything else, to actually find what he had, to find out what Saddam Hussein had at that moment. Certainly a lot of the Vatican Museum type stuff, which is, alien related stuff. Some of that stuff supposedly just has crazy power and it can be tiny. So I would imagine that, for the group that would be interested in that stuff, which again, this is where I kind of come back to the cabal, a group above all governments, if they wanted to absolutely be sure that he wasn't holding something that they wanted, I'm sure they got to it at that point. I'm sure a certain battalion was tasked with, you're going to try to find this particular article, something like that.
So it might have been, or not even part of the military op, but part of something that was like, we have to get these people in there prior, or maybe the military op was a cover for the whole thing, or who knows. But either way, the cabal orchestrated an extraction of maybe some artifacts.
Right. I mean, that would be their MO. And obviously, all you get if you're a ground pounder, if you're a ground guy in the military, is your mission is to take that museum.
Yeah.
And we'll tell you what to do once we're inside of it. But we want you to just go surround that museum, and we'll take any prisoners that are in there, and then we're going to go through it, something like that. And I'm sure in that type of stuff, there was ground penetrating radar used as well, but just like with the pyramids, where they can see anything that might be hidden below the surface, right? So especially with an older museum like that, who knows how many tombs are down there or things like that. So they'll use ground penetrating radar that will, it'll go down 25 feet, and they can see if there's a volume or a room that they need to further investigate. I believe that's how they found Saddam Hussein, is that they were actually using a ground penetrating radar, and they saw the little tunnel area that he was in, and that's how they found the little ladder that they eventually pulled. I think they pulled him up wasn't that what you recall? Something like that, where they brought him up a ladder or something. He was in an underground bunker.
There's like a picture.
And I think that
coming out
of
the desert up a ladder.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it was like a platoon, just doing a stalk through an area, and they had one guy with the ground penetrating radar going, hey, wait, right over here is a big chamber. And so that's how otherwise they would have just walked right past him. That's how they do it. So now they have Gorgon Stare and all this other technology. They can see it with drones. It's unreal what they have now. Yeah.
Darren, do you have any questions before we kind of shift gears, or?
No, I think I'm ready to shift gears. I'd like to, because my assumption is that you can't really give any specific examples from those between the briefings and some of the stuff you were looking at that wasn't the same as the news. I'm assuming you have to keep that somewhat vague.
It's been 20 years, but I can just tell you, like, a general idea is like, before the Highway to Hell. So the Highway to Hell was just maybe, I would say it was a little bit less than a quarter mile wide, right? So it was a lot of vehicles. It was tanks and military trucks, and just every kind of military thing was coming south, all in one big line. It wasn't just the highway. It was because they can just drive right through the desert, right? So it was a little bit wider than that. And that was occurring from the get-go. And that wasn't being reported until we were there for 43 days. My recollection is the Highway to Hell, if you think about this for a second, if you've got a line of vehicles and you stop the front vehicles that are coming south, well, guess what happens? The whole line stops, right? And then it's a nightmare for the guys who are behind it, because now jets are just coming in. They can't move. They could run off to the side, which some of them did, and that's why it looked that way eventually. But that was going on for days before CNN is reporting what's happening. So I mean, that line of tanks and stuff I would say was decimated within the first 5 days. That thing is toast. That whole line is toast in the first 5 days. But that's not reported on CNN to the very end because it was the most dramatic visually to look at, right? So when they finally did get reporters in there, they're like, holy cow, there's this whole line of just demolished vehicles and obviously humans. It's brutal. That just runs for miles and miles and miles, right? The highway to hell, I think is what they call it. So as I'm watching that, I'm participating in it, and I'm going, why are they reporting that we're just doing airstrikes at like these various locations with B-52s from way up high? Why are they not reporting this? And they're being fed what they report from the military that's on site, right? So my impression was, and again, this is, what has it been? That's 1991. How many years is that? 35 years?
34 years.
There you go. That's good math. I I can't do it that quick. My impression at the time was like, all right, so the military doesn't want people to know that that we've just completely stopped their entire line of stuff coming south. And I was thinking, does that mean because we're about to go in with ground troops and they don't? In other words, it was just fascinating to me to watch what was coming in on CNN, which was like, oh, they're striking these bridges way up north, and they're hitting this building that's supposedly have a meeting, and here's another oil well that's going up in flames, and I'm thinking, but the majority of the operations were right there on the highway to hell because that's where all their armor was, right? That's where everything was that they were bringing south to do their attack. And of course, all along what I'll just call the fence, like between Iraq and anything south, all of that armor that was just kind of stationed there, all of that was being taken out as well. So I just found it fascinating at the time. Like, okay, I don't really understand the politics of why they don't just say what's happening. And perhaps I would have to be at a higher level. Like maybe if I was a general at the time, you'd say, okay, we don't tell them about that because we have these other strategies that we need to work first. We don't want the media to go off on all these 20-year-old kids who are basically conscripts, just decimated.
Well, because the enemy's watching CNN too, right? So
there you go. So, yeah. And that's what I mean by, I'm assuming I always assume that people are trying to do the best they can with the given situation, including our commanders.
Yeah.
But I also had a sense of it's even above the military. All I can tell you is I had a sense like there is just another
level
parallel line happening here, and someone else is pulling string. It was just a sense I had, and I tend to write. I just go off of a gut feeling and go, okay, well, I'll just keep watching it. I'll just keep watching this thing and see what happens.
And that's what you've been kind of using, and that's what you've been incorporating into your books and your screenplays and stuff. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So if I write like for instance, in Hush, you'll get to read about Roswell. It's basically your covert history. So Hush, I've tried to write what I believe is America's covert history since about 1940. Now it's also
like you have to say it's sci-fi kind of, or
well, because I am creating these scenes again, obviously it has to be fiction, right? Because I'm saying, well, these settings like Roswell is a real place, but the characters are fictional, and I'll kind of allude to why I do that. My experience of reading factual, or what people say is factual, when they write books on history, even real history, nobody really knows exactly what happened unless you're in that person's shoes. So I'll use like Eisenhower as an example. Eisenhower was involved in the 1941 Cape Girardeau recovery. That was the first on land recovery in America. Cape Girardeau is Missouri, which is another state east of Texas.
When you say
North of
recovery,
Yeah, so the 1941 Cape Girardeau crash landing, for your listeners, was the first that I'm aware of mainland crash landing where basically a flying saucer came down molten. It was shooting across the sky silent. It hit a farmer's field, broke into 3 pieces, mowed down bushes and trees and across the farmer's field for, I think, kind of a country mile. And the whole town came out and was there. At the time, they found 2 dead, basically Zeta Reticuli, roughly 3 foot to 4 foot tall humanoids. There is a famous picture from 2 guys holding up the final one that stayed alive for about 2 hours. I think by the time they hold him up in the picture, he's dead. But you can look up Cape Girardeau, alien, and it's kind of a famous picture. But essentially, if I'm trying to recreate that, I can read all these different books and articles and people who said they were there, and I can kind of get a pretty good idea, like what day, what time, when did it come down, I try to do the hardest research I can, because for me as a storyteller, it's so much more exciting to say that, well, Preacher Huffington, and it was Preacher Huffington who got called, instead of just saying, well, it's Preacher Jack or whatever. I want to give as many hard details as I can research, because for me, it's much more interesting to say, well, Ike supposedly arrives 6 hours later, so that the public has already been there. They've dealt with a live alien, 2 dead ones. The preacher has been called out. Preacher Huffington, I believe was his name. I know it starts with an H. I think it's Huffington, was called to read them last rites. So I don't know if you got last rites in Canada. Do you guys have last rites in Canada?
probably not.
Okay, so last rites is like a Christian thing, where when someone's obviously dying, a preacher will come out and kneel beside them and give them the hominis bominis. I'm sorry you're dying, and we love you, and God loves you.
We burn churches
What
up
do you
here.
call that?
Oh, we definitely
call
burn
that
churches. But there's definitely that.
Like get him a beer. What is
Yeah.
it? What is it in Canada? Give
We
him
burn
a beer.
churches. I don't know. We're kind of
Burn churches. Wow. Okay. So America's.
You're more Christian than us. No, I mean there is quite a Christian. Yeah, in the middle of the country, we have quite a bit of Christianity still, but I don't know what they do with the last rites.
Yeah, and like the Bible Belt, "Come and Save My Soul." What's his name singing that great song? Of course, his name escapes me. But Life Goes On. It's Life Goes On. That tune. Did I do that okay?
Yeah.
And I can't name the artist. You guys probably know who it is. Anyway, John Cougar Mellencamp. There you go.
Oh,
John
yeah,
Cougar
yeah,
Mellencamp
yeah.
sings "Let the Bible Belt Come and Save My Soul." So the Bible Belt is a big deal for America, right? I mean, it's a big part of who we are.
Jack and Diane's song.
There you go. There you go. And I would say, the majority of our population, especially in 1941, was Christian oriented, and so last rites would be a thing that they would do for any individual, especially, obviously humans. But in this case, pretty amazing. They knew they were not human, and they called the preacher, and the preacher came out and gave him last rites. The doctor was able to communicate with the live one for a little bit, but couldn't save it. Didn't know it was having respiratory problems. And my research says that could be anything from that they're just not used to the atmosphere to an injury that was occurred during the actual crash. But so that occurred, and then Ike arrives a few hours later in darkness, is driven to the site. Now, Ike's a colonel at this point. This is Eisenhower. He's unknown, so you wouldn't have known him as a colonel because he hadn't become famous yet. World War II hadn't started. He hadn't, beat the Nazis yet. He was unknown. And so I'll write his story in the book, and I'm in his shoes. I'm experiencing it real time as I write it, as he was. So I just take as many details as I can get, and I go, let's see what it would be like to be Ike as a colonel going to his first crash event where instead of it being just a downed Army airplane that had a mishap, he's suddenly confronted with a bunch of people who don't know what the hell they're looking at. And that his officers that are taking him there are like, sir, we think these are aliens. And what is that like for him? To realize that a craft has come from out there, which we Americans don't have the capability to do. And it's crash landed and there's technology in front of him. And he's asking like, well, where's the engine? And they're like, sir, we haven't seen an engine. Well, why has that thing still got power to it? Because there would be lights on one section of it. And well, sir, we don't know that either. And we haven't smelled any gas or oil. I mean, when you think about how intense it is, when you think about an anti-gravity craft, and it's 3 different molten pieces traveling faster than any of the townspeople had ever seen, streaking across the sky and then hitting the ground and just kind of blasting everything. And then the ship itself, I'm giving hints of what's in the book, but you can read it if you're interested in. And what your readers may find is it's a fun read, I think. The feedback I'm getting is, okay, we're ready for this to be a movie because I write as a screenwriter, right? That's kind of my background. But what you'll find is if you look into any of the details, you will suddenly start to realize like, oh, wow, he did a lot of research because this lines up with this book and it kind of meets this book and this article and this person who said they were there. I do my best to bring it to bear, whether it's Roswell, that event, future events. So,
well, let's go back to Ike for a sec, because is part of that story, that encounter, the him getting a taste of the military-industrial complex and the cover-up machine from that? Like,
that's a great question. So I'm assuming you're asking that because you were aware by the time he left that he had lost full control. Is that why you're asking that? Okay, good. Yeah. Cool. All right. So I'll start with that just for your listeners to kind of remind them. By the time Ike left office, his departure speech, which if you haven't heard it, is basically him saying, I just want everybody to know that I'm no longer in control as president of the United States. My Congress is not in control of what really happens out there. So you can listen to that speech. It's still online. He was briefed. He had wanted to tell that speech earlier and he wanted to say more, but that's as much as he could say. From what I understand, it was kind of scary for him to even say that speech. But he, at the time, realized by the end of his second term, I think, his second term, that would have been like 1961 or 1962. Kennedy comes in right after that. And he even tried to warn Kennedy, like, Kennedy had been aware of the alien presence since Forrestal. Now, I don't know if you remember who James Forrestal was. Do you guys remember James Forrestal?
Yeah, the famous memo, I think. Right?
Okay, good. So, I mean, being Canadians, that you even somewhat nod your heads about, you've heard that name before. So James Forrestal was the Secretary of Defense. And in 1949, he was thrown out the 16th floor of Bethesda Military Hospital because he wanted to tell the world about the new alien phenomena, about the new alien presence, because they were invading our skies like never before. They were invading our skies at Roswell because it was the only nuclear base in the world. We had blown off the bomb with Oppenheimer in 1945. That sent shockwaves through the multiverse. Like the power of a nuclear weapon turns heads of any races on other planets as well. It affects weather systems. It's a big deal, right? And we were just new primitives with a big firecracker that we didn't know what we were doing. We were blowing off stuff. We weren't even sure. Oppenheimer clearly wasn't sure what it would do, right? There was some concern like this thing could keep going and just take out everything, right? So that's kind of interesting. So suddenly, right after the 1945 blast, you have all of these alien races who are like out in the multiverse going, okay, what is Earth doing? What are those primitive humans? What have they got? What the hell? So suddenly we have all of these sightings from all of the residents of Roswell who are looking up and seeing all these little things going by at right angle turns, Mach speeds, flying in formation for 2 years before Roswell actually happened. I mean, since 1945, Roswell doesn't happen until July 4th of 1947, right? So July 4th weekend is when I say Roswell happened then, but that's when we had 3 crashes all at once. It was a rough weekend. And the other thing that had occurred by 1945 is our radars had become really powerful. And what we found out is if we triangulate 3 radars on a flying saucer, because those pilots are brainwave connected to their ship, those ships are alive. We call them living conveyances, right? They're molecularly alive. They connect kind of like you and I do with a horse. If you've ever ridden a horse, you kind of feel it, you know it, you get to know its personality. You get bucked off if it doesn't like you, right? But with these ships, with the super advanced alien ships, at least the ones that I've read about and people who have had experiences on these ships, they're like, it's just unreal. They are molecularly alive. So they interact with their pilot. Well, if the pilot gets hit with 3 different radars at the same moment, he's cross-triangulated, or she, it just fried their brain and the ship would crash. So all of that was occurring on that weekend at Roswell. But in addition to that, that just happened to be a July weekend where the electrical storms were excessive. Like people said, these were the worst electrical storm weekend we had seen in years. So it just was like a powder keg that weekend. And 3 ships came down with 2 different races. There were Zeta Reticuli that were found, and there was also oranges that were found, a little bit taller than Zeta Reticuli. They have more round eyes. If you go to my website, mdselig.com, you'll see the autopsy, which I've now colorized. That's showing an orange alien, not a Zeta Reticuli. And it's the same one where I have the footage of them bringing in the stretchers of 4 dead aliens and 1 live one. So that footage is on my website as well. They're bringing dead aliens and a live alien in front of Colonel Blanchard, who is the base commander. That's Monday the 7th. It's 1700 hours. Monday the 7th of July, from a crash recovery 35 miles north of Roswell. And a huge armored convoy brings in this set of aliens to be viewed by his staff. And they're all standing there when they're brought in, and you can just see them completely perplexed, in fear, because one of them is alive and it's moving his hand. And the accounts that will be on the web, I haven't posted the accounts on the website, but of the folks who were in P3 at that time said the alien was whining, kind of an eerie, high pitched, kind of inhuman sound. But its hand is moving, its knee is moving a little bit. So there's 1 live alien. But just to be a regular human, to have your first encounter with, like, oh my God, these are real. These are not from here. These are advanced, whatever they are. Right. So you can really see it.
And just to bring some context to that, back in that time, like we have the Flying Saucers Are Real from Kehoe on our audiobook page there. And that's, Roswell's not really in there as Roswell, but it's in there as a crash because there's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of encounters and crashes, that a whole bunch of flying saucers that are happening back then. And, now Roswell's famous, but back then it was just another weekend of sightings and crashes.
When you say race, is that is that a different species alien from someplace else? Or is that just like there's different races of humans? It's just an orange colored,
Exactly. And again, to your question of, are they from somewhere else? If the orange aliens, the reason I say they're oranges is because there's a particular individual named Michael Cruvant-Wolf. He's dead now. He wrote a book called Heavens. God, escaping my brain right now. Catchers in Heaven. Interesting book. So Michael Cruvant-Wolf, I'll come back to your question here. I'm bringing a roundabout answer to it. Worked for the Majestic 12. He was one of their top scientists. He was one of the only telepathic individuals working at S4 at the time. He worked with, of all people, Carl Sagan.
Wow.
But But Carl Sagan was known as a complete debunker of all things alien. But you got to remember that when you're being threatened and warned, like you will get no funding for your projects and things could happen to your family, you are going to be a debunker if you're told to be a debunker, but you're getting to work. Carl Sagan was known to be heavily involved. Oppenheimer was involved. It's all you'll find it in Hush. You'll find all of the research where I'm putting these characters there in situations. But I bring that back to say that when I say it's a separate race, Michael Crevant Wolf said, well, there were two species of aliens that came down at Roswell. Oppenheimer got to see the crash landing where oranges had come down. They're still roughly the same size ships, but a different shape. One was more of a pie shaped, and the other one was more about what I'll call a pumpkin seed shape, kind of rounded with a pointed front, but kind of rounded like my hand, like pumpkin seed. And it has fins on it. The oranges flew that one. The Zeta Reticuli flew just the standard saucer that you always see. But what's brought into Hangar P3 at 1700 hours on July 7th, Monday, July 7th, in front of Blanchard and his staff, those are oranges. To answer your question of, is that a different race? They're clearly a different species of alien. They look complete. The Zeta Reticuli have the standard, wraparound eyes and really long arms. These have 6 fingers. And in the video footage, not only of the footage where they're carrying in the stretchers, you see the 6 fingers and the 6 toes, which are roughly human feet. But in the autopsy footage from the next day, which I've now colorized, it's the exact, with the same leg wound that's in the hangar, is the exact alien with 6 fingers, 6 toes, same eyeballs, same dead stare, and same leg wound that a lot of people have tried to debunk, saying that's not a real alien autopsy. I will promise you, at 10 o'clock the next morning, that is Eileen Fanton, the nurse in that autopsy room. That is Major Rhea, that is one of the doctors that's with her. And behind the glass is Detlev Bronk, who is a Majestic 12 top doctor.
Wow.
So I'm just saying, I get into it super intense about who's there, who's involved, and I take some chances and I go, this is the best I can do to place who's there. And I'm naming the real characters that I think were factually there. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the real characters in the video, but I'm like, that looks pretty close to Detlev Bronk. I'm going to say that guy is Bronk, and that guy is Major Charles Rhea.
Wow. So, geez, I have so many questions. We're gonna have to have you back on because it's bringing
you bet
all
anytime.
MD, this has been great. Where can everyone find your work? Where can they follow more? Where can
Sure.
they find out more about you?
Yeah, it's been wonderful, you guys. They can just go to mdselig.com, and there's lots of links to the book. They'll find some of the videos there. They can go to my Patreon page, but mdselig.com. And you guys, I can't tell you, it's been so much fun.
Yeah, it's been great
to hang out with you guys, and
yeah, let's do it again for sure.
Hope to see you again. You got it.
All right, buddy.
Have a great day.
Take care.
You too.
And that's the end of the free version of the show, Grimerica Out Loud. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We get into a bunch of great stuff in the second half. Of course, if you guys want to check that out, head over to GrimericaOutlaw.ca today. Sign up. Not only can you support us and keep us in business, this is all we can do because, you get canceled nowadays for talking about the stuff we talk about. So if I go and try and get a real job, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy Nazi. So
yeah, we're pigeonholing ourselves.
We're unhireable. So check out GrimericaOutlaw.ca. $6 a month. Sign up today. Not only does it support us and keep us on the air, it also gets you an extension to this show. You get an extra 45 minutes or a half hour, however long this was. You get just as much. You get twice as much show for your buck. So sign up over there and do that. And that's how you support us. That's the best way to keep us in business. And you get all that extra content and the whole extra show. We do a whole extra show a week for us supporters, doing a roundup. So check that out. And of course, Grimerica.ca for our other podcast. Over 700 episodes over there. Contact at thecabin.com for trips and events. Adultbrain.ca for audiobooks and ebooks and print books and publishing books. any of that stuff, all the above, and GrimericaCBD.com for all the other good stuff.
And A-List.
Oh, that's right. And alist.ca for Canadian content, and grimerica.ca/rooms if that's what floats your boat. Of course, you can email us, graham@grimerica.com as well. But main thing is to sign up for Plus and support us. So grimericaoutlaw.ca, sign up today. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.
Who's gonna kill this sacred cow? You were never political anyhow. Since when did you start trusting in the government? Since when was it okay to ridicule and shame your neighbor? Your opinions have become as fickle as artificial flavors. What matters most to you? What the TV host told you to do? Or a moral compass that points true north, oh true? Who's gonna kill this sacred cow? You were never religious anyhow. Since when did you kiss the ring on the hand of the Pope? Since when do we need pharmaceuticals to cope? Your soul has become, ever-loving soul has become as brittle as communion wafers. What matters most to you? What the Holy Ghost told you to do? Or a moral compass that points true north, oh true? I'm gonna kill this sacred cow. Bureaucrats think I'm non-essential anyhow. Since when has our culture become so lowbrow? It's all touchscreens, and nobody has any know-how. Your idea of fun is taking 1,001 photos of your duck face. Matters most to you what the celebrities post told you was cool, or a moral compass that points true north, oh true? I'm gonna kill this sacred cow. I'm gonna kill your 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 sacred cow.